Welcome to Atheists Talk. My name is James Zimmerman. Today we're going to be discussing two books that detail belief and non-belief and why people believe and don't believe. With me to discuss these two books are Grant Steves. He's the chair of Minnesota Atheists, and Bjorn Watland is the president of Minnesota Atheists. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
So the first book that we're going to talk about tonight is 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in God, which was authored by Guy Harrison. So maybe we could just start right in. Grant, what's the reason for this book's existence?
Well, Guy Harrison, who started out as a student of anthropology and history, was interested in trying to find out what are the belief systems of various countries and people of different religions. So his book doesn't simply address Christianity, but he asks the questions that pertain to Hindus or Muslims or tribal religions, anyone that he could encounter in his travels. And that's what makes this book unique as compared to a lot of other books that deal with the belief in God. Quite often they are aimed at Christianity only, and we don't get a sense of what it's like to talk to somebody that may be a Hindu or Muslim.
So he must have gotten an idea of what the average person has for a belief in God, or what their belief statement is. And then he tried to assemble those and whittle them down to a perfect 50, or bring them up to an even 50.
Even 50,
yeah. So what kind of attitude does he bring to this subject matter then?
Harrison is a person who although is an atheist, is not a dogmatic atheist. He's a person who really wanted to understand why people believe. And specifically, he was curious about the idea that you have people who, as he notes in this first chapter, my God is obvious. That if you're a Christian, you just simply believe, my God is it. But what about those billion Muslims who think their God is it, or that billion Hindu who thinks their God is it? So he wanted to look at it from that perspective. So his attitude was really that of a scientist or the anthropologist in trying to discover why people are driven in that direction.
Were you going to add something?
Well, that's I think one of the biggest strengths of the book is it isn't this book that focuses on Christianity, that it is more diverse. It's almost in the sense of why religious literacy can be important for people to really think about their own belief systems, their own religion, in a more universal light where, you know, I may be a Christian, but I don't know anything about Islam, I don't know anything about Hinduism, that by learning that other people have things that are similar to my own, either you would modify your belief system in some kind of way, or you might drop it and say, well, how come there are all these other religions that are all very similar to the concepts that I'm talking about? Yeah. Maybe I'm not so special. Maybe this religion has something to do more with our human nature to have faith or a belief in a supernatural something, rather than something unique to me.
So his attempt to encompass all sorts of belief, not just the big monotheisms, how does that, do you think that makes the book stronger or weaker?
I think it makes it stronger simply because he's showing his respect to the individuals.
Is he trying to cover too much, though?
Well, if he were to approach it from, I'm going to defeat every argument that a Hindu has or a Muslim has, and he's not approaching that. He's approaching the generic question of belief in God. And regardless if you're the Hindu or the Muslim or the Christian, the surprising thing, basically, it's because my God is obviously the right God. The arguments are basically the same regardless. It's that people within those religions, they don't realize it, because as Bjorn had said, they're in this fishbowl of Hinduism. They can't see outside of what and look at themselves.
We kind of touched on it a couple minutes ago too, that he really tries to not chastise people and to almost maybe soft pedal some of the things that he's saying. Do you think that makes the book stronger or weaker? Is it too watered down, or the arguments he's trying to make? Is he trying to be too nice and in so doing losing the argument?
I don't think he's losing the argument at all. I think it sets a particular tone for some sort of religious dialogue, that if you're talking to someone who, let's say, I'm an atheist and I'm talking to a Christian, and a Christian says to me, how can you be an atheist when there's so much archaeological evidence proving the divinity of Jesus, for example? Now you've got a resource that it doesn't go through and say, well, biblical archaeology is crap. It doesn't do that at all. It explains from a broader perspective about archaeological evidence and the concept that archaeological evidence proves that religion existed, but not necessarily that the characters of the religion existed. And I think that works really well.
Yeah, I do too, because I like almost especially that he almost starts off by saying, listen, in a lot of books, atheists maybe come across as too harsh, or people get too rough on religion. So I'm going to really try to be respectful and to just kind of show things logically without getting overly passionate about a topic.
I like this. At the beginning, the third paragraph in that first chapter, he says, I have found that most believers are highly skeptical people.
About other religions.
About other religions, yeah. But in a sense, he's complimenting the person and saying, you're a skeptical person.
Yeah.
It's just, you need to be skeptical about yourself as well as others, because you owe it to humanity that there are so many people that are believers. You owe it to humanity to explore even your own and turn the skeptical eye on Christianity if you're a Christian, or Muslim if you're a Muslim.
So do you think that's likely to attract more readers, or will people who shy away from that kind of book still shy away from it? Or will they think he seems like a decent guy from what I read on the back cover, I'll give it a try?
I think this would be very approachable to someone who might be questioning their own faith, or might be searching or shopping for religions. They may not like the religion that they were raised in. I think there is a tendency of some people to rebel against the religion that they were raised in. So they were raised in a Lutheran household, so now they want to become a Buddhist because they identify with that simply because it's different. If people are in a state where they're not quite sure what to believe, this would be an excellent resource for people to go through and sort of answer their own questions. If they flip through and they say, well, my God created the universe. Well, that's something I identify with. I think that my God created the universe. Well, what does this have to say about it? And what's nice is that the chapters are short enough where you can read through them. He gives you his opinion, also the perspectives that he's learned, but then a list of resources in the back that you can use to check things up for yourself. So he is telling you his opinion, but he's also giving you places to look.
Right, and the resources are at the end of each chapter, so each chapter is almost its own separate essay that doesn't depend on the rest of the book.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a strength.
If you look at each one of those chapters, they're affirmations. They're not negation. I mean, for the person who's religious, you look at atheists are jerks who think they know everything. He doesn't start out by saying religious people are jerks.
Right.
He's pointing his finger at the people that supposedly would read this book and their attitude.
Right.
Or, I don't lose anything by believing in my God. He is affirming something from a religious point of view rather than, which is true of a lot of atheist books, taking it from their point of view.
Yeah, he stays positive.
And it becomes a positive, and I think that brings people in. That asks the question, well, I really wonder about the ancient prophecies that prove my God exists. What does he got to say about that? And
as Bjorn said, that's, he made a good point about people maybe questioning their own religion because they've been taught to be very skeptical of other religions and to people who might be ready to jump on their own religion. So by coming across the skeptical, someone who's maybe a little nervous to be testing out the waters of disbelief or changing their belief, maybe this book would appeal to them a lot. I think it would appeal to them more than a lot of other books on similar topics. Maybe we can touch on what are some of the common themes covered in the book. I know from my own experience reading it, I thought there was a lot of repeats. A lot of things seem to dwell, a lot of the chapters seem to be based on that the person feels God in their own life, or that some part of the material universe is too complicated to have arisen without God, or just belief based on fear. Those almost seem to be kind of redundant, if repeats in the book.
That's what in looking at this as a project to present and talk about, I went back and looked at all those chapters, and I essentially came up with this list of, you have several chapters that deal with evolution or creation, like intelligent design. You have those which deal specifically with the issue of belief and faith. That's another grouping, maybe 5 or 10 chapters. And you have the existence of God, which is a separate issue. Does he or she actually exist or not? And addressing that. And then there's that question of, well, everybody believes, the majority believes, therefore I should believe.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, you have all of those groupings that are sort of accessible, and it also is a way of approaching the book in terms of the reading, that if that's your issue, creation, let's say, and evolution, you could go through and read the 5 or 6 chapters that he specifically addresses that.
And what about, let's see, he discussed about, you mentioned the majority can't be wrong. I thought that was an interesting point, because he seemed to keep going back to the same theme of, well, it just seems like a lot of people put their faith in Jesus, but when you look at the whole world, really 5 out of 6 people don't. He seemed to kind of resort to that reasoning a lot.
Well, and it's true. In Chapter 2, almost everybody on earth is religious, which is true. The religious outnumber the non-believers 10 to 1, maybe. The billions of people that are Catholic or Protestant or Muslim or Hindu. And so he says 80% of the world's people claim to have some sort of religious identification or belief in God. And then you move from that point on, so what?
Right.
But if you base your religion on faith, rather than having some kind of evidence, then you really have no proof. And that's, from the atheist point of view, that's where we are looking at it.
Yeah.
There's some evidence to show maybe not. Whereas they're saying, I have faith, therefore it's true. And as Dawkins said last night, you're going to take a plane. Which would you have design it? Faith or science?
Right.
I'll take science.
Yeah. Because if faith designs it, it'll be just a magic carpet, right? Or a broomstick.
Right.
Yeah.
It was his comment, yes.
So 50 reasons people give for believing in God. So good book, quick read, and you don't even have to read the whole thing if just certain parts appeal to you. And
That's right.
Yep. And then the other book we were going to talk about tonight is Godless, written by Dan Barker. And maybe, Grant, you can start us off talking about that one, too. Just maybe start by telling us what are the major parts of Godless.
Dan Barker is a longtime atheist, but he started out, in this book, part 1, deals with his early conversion to Christianity and having a born-again experience. And then he goes to part 2, which is essentially beginning to describe how he's moving away from it and accepting atheism. And then he gets into chapters which deal with the discrepancies and the problems within Christianity. And then he ends up in part 4 reflecting upon what he's doing now in the foundation that he and his wife run, which is the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So it's a progression in his life. So this is, in a sense, a biography, but it's also a compendium or a collection of material that would argue against particular religious positions.
Part 3 especially sounds
yes,
like.
part 3 is the yeah.
So maybe we can discuss a little bit the major part of the book, as you just said, is the conversion and deconversion of the author himself. So maybe you can give us some detail, some background about that.
Well, I had the great joy of interviewing Dan, and he started out at age 15 to be a Pentecostal. He was born again. He became a preacher, and he toured in the West, joined the Catherine Coleman group, and believed fervently, and had great faith in his religion. And there's no doubt about it that as you're reading that first part, you get this the idea that this man was a committed Christian. Mm-hmm. He wasn't somebody who maybe. No, he was committed. And so when you finally move up to his deconversion process in 1984, you really have a sense of how he practiced his religion, and that it wasn't something superficial. Because as he indicates in his book, there are a lot of people who look at atheists and they say, well, you know, you left because you didn't have a good foundation. You didn't really believe.
Right. You weren't sincere. Maybe.
You weren't sincere. And he is a contradiction to that very notion. And I believe that's true of most of the atheists that I've met, that if they went through that deconversion process, they were at one time committed Christians, really did believe.
So the part one is basically he's trying to prove that he really was.
I think it is. Sincere. Yeah, it's a proof that he's sincere. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he has certain objections to Christianity, obviously. But which ones does he address in the book? We have a few written down here. First, he questions the morality of Christianity. Mm-hmm. How does that come into play in the book?
Well, in his book, after he talks about his conversion story, he spends a lot of time going through his debating style, and that's almost what the later parts of his book read like, are responses to research that he's gathered when he's been debating. So it's really easy for him to just recycle and repeat those in book form, and they are also useful, especially if someone else is going to be debating. He debated Dinesh D'Souza, who made the claim that Christianity is essentially the cornerstone on which Western civilization and our democracy itself is founded on. Dan Barker responded to that by citing examples of the Bible where, for example, infants are to be smashed against stones, and there are horrible stories of women being taken as sexual slaves, and people being ordered to be killed, thousands of people, not to mention the flood, which God kills everybody except for Noah and his buddies. And so he really pinpoints on those parts of the Bible that people would really rather ignore. A lot of religious people will say, well, that's all allegory. All the bad stuff, that's just a story. It's just a message. Yeah. Well, what's the message you're supposed to get out of killing a God that gave life to everything? And an apologist would say, well, God gave you life. It's God's choice to take it away. There is no morality. There is no good or bad. Right. It's God's action, so it's right.
That's a really strong point that he makes, because if people want you to believe a certain way, they usually have a pamphlet or a booklet, or in the case of Christians, they have the Bible. So to say, I read your book, and that's why I'm not part of your organization, that seems like a really strong argument to me.
Well, within Christianity and Judaism, they base the law upon the Ten Commandments. That's what we are faced with when they want to put it in buildings, and they talk about the Ten Commandments. And most people, as Barker indicates, most people do not examine the Old Testament and realize there's more than one Ten Commandments. Yeah. The Ten Commandments that we see is in Exodus chapter 20, but the Ten Commandments, where it actually uses the word Ten Commandments, is found in Deuteronomy. And it's interesting how it differs a little bit from the original 10, when it says, neither shall the sacrifice of the feast of the Passover be left until the morning. I don't think we have that in the Ten Commandments anymore. Nor, thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk, referring to a goat. But it is not in the original Ten Commandments. The other thing is that we have this idea that our judicial system, our whole body of law, is based upon the Hebrew text, the Ten Commandments. And if you go through even the original Ten Commandments that appear on the walls, most of it has to do with religion, It doesn't have to do with the judicial process
Right.
that we have now. The judicial process comes out of the Greeks and the Romans. It had nothing to do. Democracy in the Hebrews?
Right.
There was no democracy. They didn't sit around and vote. You had a king.
I was going to ask you guys about the contradictions and discrepancies. You kind of touched it. No, that's fine. Did you? Was there anything else? I mean, I'm sure there was.
Oh, yes.
Any other contradictions or discrepancies, I mean, that bothered Dan Barker about the Bible?
Well, there are numerous, obviously, contradictions and these discrepancies. I wanted to get to the ones that apply to Jesus, where you have, within the Gospels, these discrepancies. So Matthew says, as it began to dawn, this is when the women visited the tomb. Mark says, very early in the morning. Well, that works. Luke says, very early. And then John comes along and he says, when it was dark. Now, maybe it was dark in the morning. That's possible. Or,
Well, don't you see that proves the legitimacy of the Bible? Because if John was written later, he's obviously reading the older Gospels. And so if he makes an intentional mistake, that means he's not reading the older Gospels. He's writing from his own personal experience.
that's true. Mark
Yeah.
was, or John was there. The rest of them just arrived too late.
Right?
But all through the New Testament, you have these contradictions in the Gospels about Jesus and the people that were there and what did they see, and the messengers, about the tomb itself. Did she know, Mary, did she know Jesus had been resurrected? And the Gospels are not consistent. Especially John seems to be a little bit at odds with the other three. Just a bit.
And these are things that bothered Dan Barker.
It bothers Dan
Rightly
Barker.
so,
It bothers
yeah.
me.
Mhm.
You know, you
Which is why you're going to leave Christianity one day, right?
yeah, why right? Why I'm going to leave Christianity someday is.
Well, I think one of the strongest things that I remember when I took a New Testament studies course is typically when people read the Bible, they read it in order. They're not reading it in a parallel fashion. They're not reading the gospel stories that in Luke that compare to the gospel stories in John, or see the parts of John that aren't in any of the other gospels. Once you start exposing those different things, they become so clear that there are such contradictions in them. And if you're going to be anywhere close to a biblical literalist, even someone who thinks that the Bible is allegory, there are severe mistakes in how the books compare with each other that you have to do a tremendous song and dance. It would be exhausting to try to balance all of those.
It is exhausting.
Yeah.
Most approaches to the Bible, you're right. People do not read it chronologically. I mean, they do read it chronologically. They don't think of it in chronological terms because theology imposes a frame and says, this is how you organize it in your mind now. So if you take a book that you happen to, you're going to be recommending, Misquoting Jesus by Bart Ehrman, in one of his earlier books, which is The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, Ehrman clearly defines how you take a particular scripture and it can be translated either favoring the Trinity and favoring Jesus as God, or it can be translated just the opposite. And because of the Council of Nicaea, you have a Trinitarian framework or theology that is going to play out in the translating and in the interpretation and in the understanding of the scripture that you're reading.
So then you mentioned in part 4 of the book is he's no longer a Christian. He's now an atheist. He's established Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Right.
Maybe you can touch on some of the things that foundation does, or the things that Barker talks about in the book about the foundation.
He's a co-founder now, and president, I should say, co-president, not co-founder, co-president of the group with his wife. And what they have done is they bring lawsuits against government where there's a question of separation between church and state. And they have put a lot of their efforts and funding into that. That's their major pursuit.
Okay.
And they've also been very successful advertising. Their they were really well known for having billboards when atheist groups typically wouldn't have billboards. So they would have, I can't remember some of the billboards that they've had. They've had a billboard that says "Imagine no religion," and it's in beautiful. It looks like beautiful stained glass, but it gets people thinking about those. And that's from a John Lennon song.
Right,
That's
yeah.
something that's in popular culture.
Most people sing along with. Yeah.
Right, right. Sometimes John Lennon's song is changed to "Imagine one religion," as a perverse twisting of that
John
song.
would have liked that.
Yeah, I'm sure that doesn't
Yeah.
violate any copyright. Yeah. So, besides these two books now, are there any other, if someone's already read these books, what else can we suggest to our viewers that are maybe of a similar theme? Grant, you want to go first?
I'll go first.
Sure.
One that I strongly recommend because of its complete overview and looking at the arguments involved in the existence of God and the introduction to atheism is by David Eller. He's an anthropologist who teaches out at the University of Colorado, and he's going to be interviewed on Atheists Talk in April.
Oh, okay.
So that's a plug. Second plug. We just interviewed this man, Eric Mazel, and his book is The Atheist Way. Now, unlike a lot of the books that we've had, this particular book really talks about how to live as an atheist. Making meaning is the subject of it.
All right. And then Bjorn, did you have a book too?
Yeah, I have a book misquoting Jesus. If you really liked the section of the book that really deals with biblical contradictions, that deals with concepts about trying to impose theology
Part
or
3.
using the Bible to impose theology, you can really get a lot of information out of here. And this book is actually what made my wife Jeanette an atheist.
Oh, really?
When she read through this, she started understanding
And
how
who's the author there?
it's been used. Bart D. Ehrman.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you both for being here and for discussing those two books.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the program tonight. If you'd like to contact us at the address that you see on the screen, we'll send you a free copy of our newsletter. Here's the latest newsletter. If you have any topics you would like to discuss on this show or that you'd like to see us discuss in the show, please contact us. If you're interested in us, we're interested in you. Thanks for listening.